Well, hello. I'm really, really happy to have with me today Professor Dillon Miller from San Jacinto College here, who's been an avid fan of game-based learning and used games in his classroom for quite some time. Welcome, Dylan. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hello. Yes, nice to be here. My name is Professor Dillon Miller, as you said. I'm a mathematics professor and honors coordinator at San Jacinto College in the greater Houston area. And I'm definitely a big fan of game-based learning. I've been using it for quite a few years now. And it's been a huge hit for my students, as well as just keeping the classroom engaged. And it's been a lot more fun than, say, traditional teaching has been.
So tell us a little bit about your calculus classes you teach.
Right. So I introduce this game-based learning in Calculus 1, and a lot of those students follow me into Calculus 2, Calculus 3. In my Calculus 1 course, we start with limits, which the game-based learning that we use, that's when we are using it. And then we proceed there to differentiation. And then as we go into with graphing with our calculus, and finally with our integration antiderivatives. So that's where the first introductory calculus course comes into play. And the way we've been using game-based learning, like I said, was for the limits topic. And so that has changed dramatically from what we were doing before, where it was lecture, exams, right? Kind of the rinse repeat that we do. We give them homework online. But once we introduced game-based learning, it seemed that we saw improvement in retention and as well as academic success. And so that was kind of the difference between the two that I've seen.
Classes, but when you first started, you didn't know. So, what was the impetus for actually introducing a game to your class?
So that statistically, calculus is not a very successful course for students and has a very high dropout rate. And we're not really retaining a lot of those students to get into calculus too. So it's discouraging a lot of our STEM majors. And so I'm just trying to be innovative as possible. And whenever I heard about the game for use in calculus, I was very eager to try it. Fortunately, I'm used to trying new things and reporting back, and we're very lucky that we're able to try new things, and we don't get much kickback if we fail or not. So I was willing to try anything and everything, and this was one of those. And once I heard about it, I was quick to jump on it. I was a video game person myself, and mixing with calculus was just bringing out the nerd in me. I'm very excited to use that. And so with my students, I mean, whether or not they liked video games or not, it just gave them um, a different approach to learning. It seemed like they were put in control of their learning experience and not so much just me, the sage on the stage, giving them all this material. They had to find it for themselves. So learning about the game made me very intrigued and hopeful that it would improve retention rates, success rates in our calculus students, and just have them excited about the material.
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned you experimented, you tried different things, and you stuck with a game over another medium. Why the game instead of some other medium like movies?
So in the past, I've used a different like computer kind of approach to things where it's like a competitive game in a sense where they log on and they answer a question under a time limit, and then it would show on the screen like who picked which answer, and then we would just talk about it. That would be the bulk of the class period. I was flipping the classroom to where at home they were watching my pre-recorded lectures. So we spent class time engaging with material, giving them options to actually, work the problems. And we would talk about it, and they could be in groups, especially with our online experience. We were on Zoom, and so we could break out into groups and have those discussions on the problems I was giving them while we were playing a game online, which was nothing like this other game-based learning that we've been using. And I wasn't really getting a lot out of that approach. Like I said, I experiment with a lot of things. When I first taught calculus, it was the very traditional approach where I would lecture for an hour and 50 minutes a class, and they would go home, do the homework, come back, and that's how it was. And then, so I tried the second thing, which was let's flip the classroom because there's been a lot of success with that. and you can't please everyone. But what I found is that even helps more. And then when I switched to game-based learning, where they are solely in control of their learning on limits, that it was a bigger increase than when I was telling them watch the videos at home and come to class and practice with an online competitive multiple choice kind of quiz, if you will. And so that's what I was trying in the past. I still use it sporadically, especially in other courses, but it's nothing on the scale of the game-based learning that I've used with your product.
So how has a class changed? So if you look back and look at all the different innovations, you touched on it already some, but if you were to quantify it, like before and after, how has a class changed since you introduced a video game, an educational game, into your class?
So just to start, it did come with its challenges. You know, we are a community college, and a lot of times resources are hard to come by. A lot of our students, they are sharing a computer at home with maybe certain siblings, parents. They might not to see that get their computer until later. So I was able to kind of overcome that by having classes in computer labs, where the first week of class we were just solely doing the game, and the rest of the computers at the campus they could use as well for the game too if they needed to outside of class, because a lot of my students did have those challenges where I don't have a computer at home that is readily available. And our institution, luckily, during the online learning period for COVID, we had loaner laptops we could send to your door, and so that kind of eliminated that problem when we had online learning during COVID. And so since then, you know, whether they're on campus or in my classroom or at home or they're getting the loaner laptops, they have the access and it's very equitable. Um, so with that, it's been very easy to get them to, you know, work through the game. And what I've seen because of that is they talk to each other more. They were engaging more with me. I mean, before I did try them being engaged and practice problems in groups, but it seemed with this game, they were very interested on how do I get past this puzzle. They were very much more intrigued by this different style of learning. It wasn't just solve this limit. It was, we're going to have this puzzle with different aspects of it in this one point, and then once you get past that point we go to the next point, and they're trying to figure out not only the math but the strategic way to navigate through the game. And I felt that that was a much more stronger experience for them. And it kind of went over, and when we went to the next topic with derivatives, and then from there, I didn't have the game-based learning approach for those topics. um, in the future, I wish we do, because I can tell from the first, you know, set of material on limits that they were wanting more of that. um, there were some outliers, of course, people who may not felt comfortable with it, but they're welcome to a new approach. There's always going to be students who would like the traditional approach because that's all they've had their entire lives, and when you try to give them a different approach they're not used to, that unfamiliarity could be too much for them, and so they kind of sometimes want to go back to the old style. I always had videos on the limits that I used to lecture on before the game-based learning, so I have those posted for them, so they can go back, and if they want to learn a traditional way they can, but they have this option as well, um, for the game-based learning, which I always required them to do, but my lecture videos was always optional for them, because so it did give those students who did like that usual approach that opportunity if they needed to.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you mentioned there. We've also seen that there are surprisingly quite a few students still out there that believe that the sage on the stage is the way to learn and how classrooms should be conducted, and that anything else is not really learning or teaching. But I'm glad you've been able to overcome this. Um, Now, do you use games in your other classes? And if not, why not?
Oh, I do the flipped classroom experience in my other classes. I haven't found anything close to what we use in our calculus. So, say in college algebra or pre-calculus, or this contemporary math quantitative analysis class that we do for non-STEM majors. They do what I was saying before, where I give them a computer game with just problems to work in a time limit, multiple choice, and then it shows on the screen, you know, this is who picked A, B, C, D, and then we break out in groups on talk about the problem, and then we come together, um, and talk as a class. So I still do that with my other classes just because I haven't really done a lot of research or looked for other types of styles for game-based learning in those classes. This was definitely more easily available to me because it was already finished and complete. It was just, hey, try this out. And so once I did, for calculus, I was very much intrigued in that. And I'm wanting to do this in other classes. I think I just don't have the tools to really do that myself, or there's no companies really out there that we really heard of that really invest in game-based learning. Are the publishers that we use, we're kind of subjected to them unless we have open resources for them, for the students. So it's like we're subjected to what publishers give us for online homework. You don't really see, I haven't seen any publisher that's invested time in this game-based learning approach.
Yes, you're correct. Unfortunately, there's still not a lot of high quality um, games out there, educational games, especially high school, college, university level, for a variety of different subjects. Now, you've talked about how the classes changed. Let's talk a little bit about what curriculum changes you've made, if any. How did you change your actual curriculum when you introduced the game? And be specific, give some examples.
So when I introduced the game in my Calculus 1 course, I'm still being consistent with my other colleagues are doing who are not following the game, especially throughout the college. And, the state requires us to do certain student learning outcomes. So I make sure I'm still following those, my curriculum. Anything the game does not address that, my other colleagues are doing or were required to do, I also supplement with a mini lecture, which was 30 minutes of one class period where I go over different things that the game did not touch on that they still are responsible for and will help them as they progress in other calculus courses. So, for example, the game really touched on the graphical approach to limits, which was very visual, and they could see what a limit actually was instead of just a definition from a book. What it didn't really touch on was the analytical approach, was evaluating limits analytically, which is one style of evaluating limits. The game did touch on numerical approach where you just, pick a number from each side of the limit you're evaluating. But it really was strong in the graphical approach. So when I was giving exams, I saw a big jump in the graphical approach when I asked them to do that method. When I asked them to do an analytical approach, they really were relying on my supplemental, like I said, 30-minute lecture that I gave, just giving them practice problems on that. And there are other certain theorems in calculus with limits that we went over that the game may not have addressed. One thing I liked the game addressing was intermediate value theorem, because we talked about that. Another theorem that wasn't addressed that I had to touch on was squeeze theorem. So just minor adjustments that I had to make that the game did not have, just to keep up with my other colleagues and other um, student learning outcomes that we had to accomplish for our students to be successful in the course and progressing to the next course.
Well, thank you. Now, what did you actually learn by using a game in your class?
I think I learned that our students are more used to technology than we thought. We might think that they're not as intelligent to really navigate some of this, but they really are um, perseverers. They grew up with technology, and when they come to college, I feel like we have to almost baby them into showing them every single step along the way. But I was very much surprised that they could do this game and figure it out without much guidance from me. And what's really good about the game-based learning is that what I was using in the class is that they had a lot of starting guides, how to get started, and I didn't really have to do much on my end. And I was a little surprised by that because usually it's like we're trying to force feed our students, but if we really let them sit and learn on their own, that we can even surprise ourselves. And so that was definitely the biggest highlight I took that was surprising. And another is just how eager they are to learn. We might not think that they love calculus, they love math, and not every student loves math. They're just probably trying to get through these courses to get their degree that they want. But I think I discovered that they really do enjoy the content whenever you're giving them control of their learning instead of me just almost teaching at you instead of kind of with you and engaging.
Oh, that's really, I mean, very profound. I really like that, and I use the same teaching philosophy in my classes. Not talking down or at them, but really discovering things together and learning together. Now, for faculty, for teachers that are thinking of bringing games into their classroom, what tips and tricks do you have? What challenges did you actually encounter? It's like, if you could share these with.
Right. So it was challenging to recruit faculty to also try this out because it was kind of in the middle of the pandemic and we were kind of told to let's get new material to make everything online. And so people weren't as reluctant to try something new when they were creating new things for their classrooms just to kind of get by. Um, but I've had more success since then recruiting faculty. You know, I've met with a lot of them with our department meetings. I've shown them different videos of students using the product and giving them the results of the game-based learning. Numbers don't lie. And when you share with them data, like, this semester I didn't use it, I got this percentage of success. This semester I'm using it, this is the higher percentage of success. When you share those numbers, I think that's what really gets them interested, because I think we're all trying as educators to improve our students' success. And whenever we're trying to figure out, well, is this really good or not? If we've been doing it for a few semesters now, like I said, the numbers don't lie. And so that's what really entices them to try something new. And like I said, since we've gotten out of the online learning experience and everyone has probably felt more comfortable now trying new things, I've gotten much more interest from my faculty members, my colleagues that want to actually try the product. And I also have students who will present this product in front of their other peers. I mentioned I'm honors coordinator. I actually use this in all of my honors calculus 1 classes, and they have a showcase in this semester, and every semester someone always wants to talk about this game-based learning. And so it's giving exposure to other people who show up to this showcase, other students, other faculty members, administrators. It's getting the exposure that I think it needs. And so I think all in that, really all that exposure, all the data that I'm sharing with them makes them reluctant or to actually want to try the product and try this approach of game-based learning. Um, and I always offer my assistance. I'm like, hey, well, I'll get you started. And, you know, um, you guys have definitely been really good about that too, just making sure that they feel good for day one and that it's not a lot of load on us as faculty members, because we already have a lot to deal with. And so I think people may not want to try something new because they might think it's too time consuming. But when you really give them numbers of this is how many times a week I'm looking at I'm looking at the product, I'm looking at my students' work, I'm looking at, the gameplay, it's not a lot. And so I think maybe it might seem that way. It might seem overwhelming for people who are not used to technology. But once you really just give them, from A to Z, give them a step by step, I think it's much more manageable and people are more interested in trying it out.
Thank you. With your insights have been really, really helpful. I'm sure our viewers will greatly appreciate it. Before we part, any last word of wisdom, tip you may want to give to those that are watching?
I think if you try game-based learning, you will definitely surprise yourself, because I was almost thinking, well, it's a video game. The people might not like this, but I found more than not that the students really did enjoy it. And if they follow you into calculus 2 and 3, like my students usually do, I think you see a different kind of confidence in them and a willingness to participate. And especially when they get out into the job force and they're talking with their other colleagues and their um, higher ups, that they feel more confident in doing so, because it's almost like their brain is wired to do one approach, and when you give this to them, they're forced to try new approaches. And in the job, that's what we do every day. We might have things thrown at us, and when you have this different approach of learning thrown at them and they succeed, then when they get something completely new thrown at them in the future, they won't feel um, like they can't do it. They'll actually have the confidence to try to persevere and get through it and think differently about the way they think and problem solve. Because in the day, math is problem solving. And so we throw game-based learning at them, they are solving these problems. And so I think they become better people just because of this different type of learning. They're thinking critically instead of just here's example 1, 2, 3 of evaluating a limit. They're actually having to dive deeper into their thought process. So I definitely encourage everyone to try game-based learning. If, as a student, I would say um, it's going to increase your confidence for sure. And don't be afraid to try something new. You know, college is all about failure after all. So we learn from that failure too. So even if you don't do so well with it, I think you should be proud of yourself for even trying this type of approach to learning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. I really appreciate you joining us today for and sharing your knowledge and experience, what you've learned. Well, if you liked this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share with everybody. We rely on viewers like yourself. Spread the word, and please let me know in the comments what other kinds of videos you like to see, who do you like to hear from. That's all. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Till the next time.